dollars, then we can make some design decisions, just like when we design robots.
Bill Richardson from Mississippi. One of the things you said triggered a thought. First, it's not about the field, the new field, but my wife, who's the Mississippi event partner, does state she jumped up and started cheering when she heard that announcement. So it's a resounding success there. One thing that kind of I looked at more so at Worlds this year was the AI competition. But at the same time, my kids who were interested right when it came out around COVID, you know, they looked at the price tag and like, whatever. And then of course the school looked at it and was, no, we're not doing that. But in the marketing of it, my kids are really interested until they walked up and they're like, oh, that's just too advanced. It's kind of a question statement is, as event partners, I'm really interested in that. I would love to get my kids involved in that. However, the marketing behind it, and it's yes, I know it's a steep learning curve, but the approach to it from a kid's perspective, I think we need to work on that a little bit if it's not already being worked on.
Yeah, so I know Bob will jump up here too, but let me give it to you from the RECF perspective, because Bob and I were the two people behind the scenes. Bob's been working on AI for a decade, right? And he came to me a few years ago and said, I think we're ready to introduce a competition. And it was just Bob and I before we rolled it out to VEX or the REC Foundation. But there's a reason that we do beta runs, right? And that beta year was a lot more complex. And we realized it after the beta year. Bob and I are heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken, that we didn't have a VAI season this year. But that was one of the lessons learned. And that's why we stepped back and we're integrating a better camera that's easier to use, improve the GPS sensors to address all those things that you're talking about. So for a pure coding, I think you'll get as much as you want out of it, but you're not going to have to be a master coder up to start, right? So I think you'll see as we roll it out, as we relaunch it this year, and Jim's actually the program manager for AI competition, so we will reboot the launch of it very soon. We do apologize that we didn't have a season this year. There was like 8 or 10 teams that were very verbal and disappointed, but it's because we learned from that beta year, and the concern that you had is one of them we needed to address. I think you're going to find the version that comes out very, very soon is going to be much more accessible to our students. So, and remember, the AI competition is also for high school students. You know, when we talk about 3D printed parts and things like that, we're not going to change the VRC V5 program. I mean, and again, I know Grant will get into that and as part of the discussion on the screws, but we are more of a closed ecosystem. It's a decision that we've made. It keeps our prices lower. It keeps our accessibility. We also often talk about the affordability, but my staff will tell you that I talk about accessibility more than affordability. I had an opportunity to speak at a conference in DC 2 weeks ago that was always used to be a first conference, and the REC Foundation got invited for the first time. And I had so many coaches, longtime first coaches, say the one thing we love about your program is you listen to the coaches and students. So we provide all these educational materials, all these STEM labs, everything like that for accessibility so that our teachers can be coaches, right? And so that's part of the decision-making process. But as part of that, you know, we have to balance the complexity. So the AI program is that advanced program that we have at the high school level that'll bring higher end coding, but it also gives you the opportunity to do 3D printing and some other things.
Yeah, so really the beginning of this was only partly AI. And it's called the AI competition, and that's maybe incorrect because it's so much more than that. This was giving the teams who've been doing this for 3 or 4 years, 5 or 6 years, another level. Maybe they have 10 teams in the high school and one team wants to step it up. We saw a lot of changes as we started the IQ program, that once the IQ kids got into VRC, after 2 or 3 years, they wanted more. And so this whole program was made to give those teams and those schools that really know what's going on. So it is a giant leap for a new team. No new team should ever beat VAIC, right? We should always advise that, you know, that's after you've been doing this for years. And so that's really where it's aimed at. As far as the technology goes, it will be far easier. The first years were beta hardware just so we could test it out and see how it works. So I don't think the coding is going to be a massive challenge. The teams that we saw at Worlds that brought their robots, they stepped up and did it. So it just kind of depends on the dedication of the kids and the coach and whether they feel like they want to use those tools. I think some teams will go in and do it largely for the machining options, because that's really exciting to build really high quality, high class robots out of VAIC by augmenting it with some of your own parts.
And along with that too is you'll see, we take incremental baby steps. So we think that some of the technology, the camera, the GPS sensor, can be used in skills, right? So that's the transition too, is try some of this technology for the skills, right? And start getting it used there, and it'll eventually disseminate down. But I think it's a great question. I think you're going to find the relaunch, it's going to be much more easier for your students. And as Bob says, this is the new peak in our program for those students. It's amazing. I see a couple people from Nevada here, but there's a program that really influenced this because they start doing IQ in early elementary. So they have kids in 10th grade that feel they've done everything they could do out of our traditional programs. And when I gave that feedback back to VEX, that's one of the things that spurred us to this. But it's not the starting point. But I think you'll be much happier, Bill. So if I'm wrong, you can tell me next year.
All right, with that, we're going to take our break. So we're going to have lots of Q&A sessions, but I also don't want to miss the breaks because that is the time that you can recharge, rethink, get some food, use some restrooms. They're just down the hall over here. And we'll be back here in 15 minutes.